And this is what he says,
And
guys.
I think the argument can be made. I've said this before, and some people don't like it, but I'll say it again because I believe it. I think the argument can be made that given the sheer size, the sheer scope of John MacArthur's ministry and all that goes along with it, that God has used him in a greater way than any other single individual since the apostolic era.
No. No, that is the weirdest take. Like a lot of times when I'm like doing these videos, I have to look at a lot of weird stuff. A lot of stuff that people are saying, and I'm just like, why would you even say that? This is maybe the weirdest take I've ever heard. Okay, everyone has a take. I have a take on this video. You're watching my take. But to talk about John MacArthur as the greatest, the greatest influence for Christ since the apostolic age, what that means is that since Jesus was physically here on this planet, John MacArthur is the best. Like, wow. The ignorance, the pride of that. And he says because of the size and the scope, which, all right, let's talk about that. Let's be fair to him for just a second, and talk about the size of John MacArthur's ministry. To quote one of his favorite people, I'm just kidding, but it's huge, huge, huge. It's huge. Like the influence that he has through radio ministries, through the seminary, through different branches. Master's Seminary isn't just in California; it's all over the place. Up here in Canada, I run into a lot of pastors who have been trained through Master's Seminary in different ways. So, like the influence there, the influence in translation work that Grace to You has done specifically into Spanish before a lot of other people were doing it. That's a lot of influence. And to send that all over the world, there's a lot of people around the world who speak Spanish and different languages that they've been able to translate their stuff in. So the size of it is pretty huge, at least today. But so was Warren Wiersbe's, you know? Like, so was... ever heard of James Montgomery Boyce? I know John MacArthur has. Like a lot of these guys, James MacDonald has a huge ministry. Does that mean it's the best? Like if you're talking about size and scope, like there are other ministries that have a huge influence on the world. Even, I mean, someone that John MacArthur would of course be like, oh, his ministry is awful, is Joel Osteen, which I would also agree with him. That ministry is awful. But he has a huge influence. The size and scope of Joel Osteen's ministry would be something to consider if you're taking those kinds of measurements. But I mean, that's just today. And this is probably one of my biggest problems in evangelicalism. And it was one of the biggest problems in my own life. Was I was completely unaware until I went to seminary. Like I knew like the talking points, but until I went to seminary, I did not have an understanding of Christian history. I just didn't. It wasn't something that my church prioritized. Wasn't something that my tribe prioritized. It was us versus the world. And I think that this is a common problem amongst fundamentalists, is that they are so devoid of Christian history. They're so apart from it because when they look at Christian history, they see people to separate from. They see, oh, I shouldn't be like this, or they see the weakness in someone's theology rather than all the strengths. And I think that's a huge problem in separating oneself from church history, from the grand scope of Christianity, and just saying, well, today is what matters. Who's the biggest today? Now, if you were to argue like who's the most influential Christian today, well, I might actually agree that it's John MacArthur. I do think that he would probably be the most influential, for better or worse. Okay, showing my cards. All right, but I could probably agree with that. But if you're looking through church history, I mean, if you just even take the last century, are you saying that John MacArthur is more influential than J.I. Packer? come on. Like, Knowing God is one of the most famous books of all time and is going to be up there with some of these, like Pilgrim's Progress and works like the Puritans. It's going to be up there. It's going to be huge for years and years to come. Can you say the same about John MacArthur's books? Which book? The book where he talked about this specific cultural thing that's happening right now? Or that specific cultural thing that's happening right then? Those books are already outdated. All right, The Truth War, I remember being one of the first people to buy that book at the Christian bookstore. That's how nerdy I was as a teenager and moving into Bible college. I was all about it. So getting those books, lining up, no one was there. I didn't need to line up. It's not an Apple event, okay? I would just go to the Christian bookstore and be like, I want to make sure I get it on the first day that they have it. I remember even calling and being like, I want that book. Who's reading that today? How influential is that book today? Now, it's not to throw shade on that specific book or any of his books. It's just to say there are works that are going to outlive us. Like, hey, Dane Ortland's Gentle and Lowly. That's going to be something that's going to outlive you and me. That was an incredible work, and it's going to continue to have impact. It's those kinds of things that we need to think about. And then even if you go, okay, well, zoom out, look at church history. Are you saying that John MacArthur is greater? That's the word that he used. All right, let's go back and see exactly what he says, so we're being fair to him.
And I think the argument can be made. I've said this before, and some people don't like it, but
also, if you say it and people don't like it, especially in his camps, you might not want to say it again.
I'll say it again because I believe it.
He believes it.
I think the argument can be made that given the sheer size, the sheer scope of John MacArthur's ministry and all that goes along with it, that God has used him in a greater way than any other single individual since the apostolic era. And I think
it only gets worse. The more you watch it, it only gets worse. All right, so the size and scope is greater than any one individual. Guys, like I said, it's Reformation Sunday, or a Reformation Day. Like, you know who that guy is? It's Little Martin. Little Marty wrote, just a little famous thing called the 95 Theses, which super cheap on Amazon. You should have your own copy. Super great. He only started this little thing called the Reformation. Come on. Like, it's insane to think about that you're saying that John MacArthur or any preacher today has a greater influence, a greater, impact for Jesus than Martin Luther starting the Reformation, or John Calvin in his institutes, and how it's 500 years later. Like, it's 500 years later, and we're still talking about these guys. I mean, we're still looking at Augustine's writings. I've got City of God somewhere right over there. Like, I love Augustine. You could look at Augustine's writings and find all kinds of amazing things. That was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I mean, you could go throughout church, Christian history and just pick out guy after guy after guy that we're talking about their books and their writings hundreds, sometimes thousands of years later. Like, are we going to do that with anyone alive today? I think it's very prideful for us to be like, oh, well, you know what? It's this person. Even someone who I love more than you, okay? I love him more than you love him, but also I love him more than I love you. Sorry, Joe. I know you're in the chat, but it's true. R.C. Sproul, I think, was a giant. Spiritually, what he was able to accomplish, Ligonier Ministries, this resurgence of Reformed theology, does it happen without an R.C. Sproul to kind of rein in even someone like John MacArthur? Like, does that happen without him? I don't know. I don't think so. And yet, Are we going to be talking about R.C. Sproul? I'm not going to be. Well, maybe if I find him in heaven, I'm just like, hey, can we chill? And he'll probably just walk the other way. He'll go to Jesus' throne, though, because he's holier than me. Like, that's the thing. You talk about people that you're going to see in heaven. They're like, they're all going to the throne, and you're just like looking around for people. How spiritual are you? I'm just saying. But like, are we going to be talking about him as Christians? Are we going to be talking about R.C. Sproul in 500 years? I don't think so. Maybe some of his writings will be able to live on, especially since basically every writing now is being saved. We're going to have just like this immense amount of data, but I don't know if we're going to be talking about him in 500 years, because that's a long time, and you need works that are so great. By works, I'm talking about, books historically, but now that we have different kinds of media, audio or video, that is going to transcend these generations and live on and be an impact for generations to come. Has John MacArthur written A Pilgrim's Progress? I haven't seen it. Has he written... Don't get mad at me. It's a theological work, Chronicles of Narnia. All right. Has he written something like that? No. Now, has he started institutions? Yes, but what do we know about institutions? They end. They don't live on forever. Look at churches. Churches, like, it's a little bit different. It's not necessarily an institution. All right. But churches, they celebrate 100 years. Why? Because most often, churches don't last 100 years. All right. If we're talking about all these kinds of things as far as a monument to Christ's faithfulness being presented in someone's ministry, I don't think we can say something like Justin Peters says,